Hi, I'm Karen. I thought family meant home, security, love. Instead, on my 30th birthday, my parents handed me a packed suitcase and a silent eviction. No thank you. No goodbye. Just a cold command. You're too old to freeload. I paid their bills. I covered their debts. I kept the lights on, and somehow I was still disposable. But the worst part wasn't being kicked out. It was realizing I'd been used for years, and I never even saw it coming. And when I finally stood up for myself, they tried to destroy me. Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your story too, because some storms you don't survive. You outgrow them. I pulled into the cracked driveway, the sun already dipping below the horizon, casting the small town of Ridgeway, in a heavy blue dusk. The air carried that early bite of fall, where the chill sneaks under your jacket collar and makes you fold into yourself. I reached across the passenger seat for the small cake box, the only thing I'd bothered to get for myself today. $20, vanilla frosting, happy birthday, Karen, written crookedly in red icing because I hadn't wanted to correct the tired teenager behind the counter. As I stepped inside, the house felt off. It wasn't that I expected a surprise party, or even a half-hearted card. I learned years ago that my parents, Cullen and Vera, had long since abandoned the idea of celebrating anything for me. But still, there was a kind of sterile silence in the air tonight, thicker than usual. The kitchen lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that pale, unforgiving glow. Dinner was already on the table. Meatloaf, canned green beans, and boxed mashed potatoes. I hadn't even taken my coat off before Cullen barked from his seat at the head of the table. You're late. I set the cake down quietly on the counter, the bag crinkling louder than I intended. Worked late. Had to finish up some reports. My voice was flat, measured. No apology. Vera didn't say a word. Just fussed with her fork, never looking up. Cullen grunted. Pouring himself another inch of whiskey into his chipped glass, I hung my coat on the hook and sat down, feeling the tension spider web across the room. Dinner started, knives scraping against plates, the clink of glasses, the occasional forced cough. No happy birthday, no acknowledgement, just the mechanical rhythm of chewing and swallowing. I lifted my fork, pushing a sad clump of potatoes around my plate. I should have known something was coming. Cullen wasn't the type to simmer quietly for long. Halfway through his plate, he slammed his fork down hard enough that Vera jumped in her chair. The sound shot straight up my spine. He leaned back, staring at me like he was seeing something rotten. You're too old to be freeloading. His voice was cold, rehearsed. It's time you left. For a second, the words floated in the air. Unreal. I blinked at him, then glanced at Vera, hoping for some sort of contradiction, some sign this was a drunken rant. She kept her eyes down, lips pressed together so tightly they looked bloodless. I pay the internet bill, I said carefully. The electricity, half the mortgage, groceries. My voice didn't rise. It didn't crack. Just facts laid bare on the table between us. Cullen laughed, a short, sharp bark that felt like a slap. Paying a few bills doesn't buy you a lifetime stay, princess. Princess, the nickname he used to call me when I was little, climbing into his lap with scraped knees and lopsided pigtails. Now it was twisted, weaponized. I swallowed back whatever cracked in my chest. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was planned, pre-decided. They'd waited for today of all days to deliver the blow. My birthday wasn't a celebration. It was a deadline. I pushed my plate away, the meatloaf, the cake in the bag, the weight in the room. It all sat in my stomach like a brick. I stood up slowly, feeling their eyes follow me, expecting a scene maybe. Tears, begging, some pathetic display that would justify their cruelty. Instead, I nodded. Just once, sharp, final.
Got it, I said.
Cullen smirked like he'd scored some invisible point. Vera kept her head down, shame pooling in the slumped curve of her shoulders, but not enough to make her speak. Not enough to stop me from becoming disposable. I walked toward the stairs, pausing just briefly by the counter, where the cake still sat in its bag. The plastic handle had stretched from the weight, digging into the soft foam of the box. One candle was missing. The stupid little box was probably jostled in the car, but it felt symbolic anyway. One candle missing, one person missing, one family missing. I carried the cake upstairs without looking back. Each step creaked under my feet, loud, accusing, final. I closed my bedroom door behind me and leaned against it, letting the hollow thud echo in my chest. This house was never mine. Maybe it never had been. I sat on the bed for a long moment, staring at the packed bags I had been too afraid to finish over the past few weeks. Part of me had known this was coming. Maybe not today, maybe not so cruelly, but someday. I thought I had time. I thought I could fix it if I just kept helping. I peeled off my jacket, folded it neatly over the suitcase. My hands were steady, mechanical. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I was done. As I moved around the room, gathering a few essentials, my mind started clicking through logistics like clockwork. Cancel autopay for the utilities. Transfer my checks to my own account, not the joint one my mother insisted I keep for emergencies. Find a storage unit until I figured out the rest. They didn't just kick me out tonight. They forfeited everything I ever gave without asking for anything in return. Outside my window, the wind picked up, rattling the last stubborn leaves off the maples lining the street. Another reminder that winter was coming fast and I wouldn't be here when it hit. As I zipped up my suitcase, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. Same brown hair pulled into a loose bun. Same tired green eyes. But something was different. A line had been crossed, a line I couldn't uncross, even if I wanted to. I walked back to the bed, sitting down heavily. The cake sat on my nightstand now, looking absurdly small. I hadn't even thought to buy candles. Not that anyone would have been here to sing. The smell of cheap frosting filled the room, nauseatingly sweet. I stared at the box, the lonely smear of icing visible through the plastic window. Then, without thinking, I pushed it off the nightstand. It fell with a soft thud, cake and cardboard crumpling against the worn carpet. Happy birthday, Karen. I sat on the edge of my bed, the silence in my room pressing against me like a second skin. My suitcase was half-packed, gaping open as if mocking my indecision. Outside, the wind whispered against the old windows, rattling loose panes that no one had ever bothered to fix. The whole house seemed to sigh under its own neglect, and I suddenly saw it for what it truly was. Not a home, but a place where I had been tolerated. Until I wasn't needed anymore. My gaze drifted toward the cake lying crumpled on the carpet. Its smashed frosting looked ridiculous now. A childish hope smeared across beige carpet fibers. I tore my eyes away and stared instead at the dull gray suitcase, the worn handle slick from years of use. It wasn't just clothes that weighed down its contents. It was years of covering for their failures, patching their broken pieces, while mine were left to rot. Memories surged forward like a bitter tide. I remembered the time Cullen cracked a molar during one of his benders. He couldn't afford the surgery, not with the late mortgage notices piling up on the kitchen counter. So I dipped into my savings, the fund I had quietly built for my own place, and paid for it in cash. No thank you, no acknowledgement, just a grunt when he got back from the dentist, drooling and cursing the whole way inside, or the winter Vera's tires baldly skidded off the road. She called me in a panic, stranded outside town. I skipped work, bought her a whole new set, and even paid for the tow. She patted my hand once, saying you're a good girl, before handing me the repair bill she expected me to cover too. When the roof started leaking last spring, it was me up on the ladder, hammering shingles in the pouring rain. Cullen sat inside with a beer, shouting about how you can't trust these contractors nowadays, while his daughter, who he called a freeloader, saved the damn house from collapsing. None of it mattered. None of it earned me a seat at their table tonight. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes until bursts of light flashed behind my lids. The sadness was still there, but colder now, calcifying into something harder to break. The floor creaked as I stood, grabbing my phone from the nightstand. My feet carried me downstairs, steps soft out of habit. In the living room, the glow of the television painted my parents in an eerie blue light. Cullen lounged in his recliner, beer in hand. Vera perched stiffly on the edge of the couch, eyes glassy and distant. They looked fine, as if nothing had happened, as if tonight had been just another Wednesday where they shoved food into their mouths and pretended the world owed them something. I stood there, waiting. Maybe a part of me still hoped, still stupidly clung to the idea that Vera would glance over and realize that Cullen would sober up and remember who had kept the lights on when the checks bounced. But hope is a dangerous thing. And tonight it was dead. Cullen noticed me first, his lip curled in a sneer as he raised his beer can lazily. "Don't forget to turn off the lights when you leave," he slurred. "You're not paying for them anymore." The words hit harder than any slap could have. They weren't just kicking me out. They were erasing every sacrifice, every unspoken debt. I didn't answer. I didn't scream, or cry, or beg. Instead, I let the silence swallow the last piece of me that had ever needed their approval. I turned and climbed the stairs, each step slower than the last, the weight in my chest heavier than any suitcase. When I reached my room, I closed the door softly, pressing my palm against the wood, as if sealing off the part of me that had once believed blood meant loyalty. For a long minute, I just stood there, breathing in the musty smell of old carpet and stale memories. Then, with a steady hand, I pulled my laptop from under the bed and set it on the nightstand. If they thought they could toss me aside and keep living off the crumbs I left behind, they were about to learn otherwise. I flipped the laptop open. The screen bathed the room in a soft, sterile glow. My fingers moved quickly, instinctively. Years of bill payments and online transfers had made the motions second nature. One by one, I pulled up the accounts: electric, water, gas, all in my name. I hovered over the cancel button on the utilities portal, my finger trembling just once before pressing down firmly. The electric bill, gone. The water bill, gone. The gas bill, gone. Each click felt like cutting an invisible cord that had kept me tethered here, in a house where love was measured in convenience and betrayal was wrapped in silence. Next came the bank account, the one my mother insisted we keep joint for emergencies. I moved my remaining funds into a private account I had set up months ago, back when a tiny voice inside me warned that this day would come. Transfer complete. The cable and internet accounts were next services they used daily, mindlessly, never realizing it was my name on the bills, my paychecks funding their binge, watching marathons and endless scrolling. Cancel. 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 Each click was a small reclamation of power they thought I didn't have. I paused briefly over the auto insurance. Cullen's truck, Vera's battered Camry, both covered under my plan to save them a few $100 a month. I could almost hear Vera's voice from last year, sweet and sticky, saying, "You're so good with money, honey, it just makes sense."
Sure it did for them.
I clicked remove vehicle on each one, heart hammering in my chest, not with fear, but with a grim kind of satisfaction. When the last account was severed, I closed the laptop with a soft snap. The silence in the room felt different now, lighter, sharper. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger anymore. It was about balance. They wanted me gone. Fine. But they would finally feel what it meant to lose the daughter who had held their fragile little world together with invisible thread. Downstairs, the TV kept blaring, a sitcom laugh track echoing up the staircase. I wondered how long it would take before the lights flickered out, before the heater sputtered its last gasp, before reality crept into their little bubble of self-righteousness. I wasn't sticking around to find out. Tomorrow, I would be gone.
But tonight?
Tonight, I started pulling the first bricks from the foundation they had so carelessly built on my back. The glow of the laptop screen dimmed slightly as I leaned back, my fingers poised above the keyboard. It was nearly midnight, and the house had fallen into a deceptively peaceful silence. Below my window, the oak trees rustled quietly in the late autumn wind, carrying with it the brittle scent of dried leaves and the first whispers of the coming winter. For a moment, I sat still, feeling the ache seep into my bones. I wasn't just tired from the physical weight of the day, I was exhausted from years of carrying responsibilities that were never acknowledged. But exhaustion was a luxury I couldn't afford tonight. I cracked my knuckles softly, exhaled, and focused. First up was the electricity bill. I had been the primary account holder ever since Dad forgot to pay one winter, and we went 2 days without heat. My password slipped easily into the login screen. Within seconds, I navigated to the payment section, heart steady, mind sharper than it had been in years. Remove payment method. Confirmation flashed across the screen. I clicked submit without hesitation. Next was the water bill.
Same story.
I canceled the auto pay, deleting my debit information with a grim sort of satisfaction. I wasn't just leaving. I was extracting myself surgically, methodically from every vein that kept this household alive. Netflix was next. I almost laughed seeing the profile names. Dads, moms, even one labeled family movie night. A joke considering we hadn't had one in nearly a decade. Delete account. Internet service?
Gone.
Cell phone plan add-ons?
Gone.
My personal Amazon Prime account disconnected from the shared household address. Each click wasn't vengeance. It was survival. It was truth manifesting through action. After an hour, I pushed the laptop slightly aside and pulled out a yellow legal pad from the nightstand drawer. I wrote down everything I had disconnected, everything that would stop operating once the morning sun crawled across the siding of this crumbling house. I needed to see it in ink, the final tally of everything they had taken for granted. As I scribbled the last item, a wave of old, unwanted memories washed over me. Late nights staying at the office, 2 extra hours to scrape enough overtime together to cover a surprise heating bill. The vacations I canceled so Vera could replace her alternator. The birthdays I skipped celebrating because there was always something more important they needed for me. I clenched the pen tighter, forcing my hand to steady. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about refusing to be their safety net any longer. Scrolling through my bank app, I found the emergency savings account I had set up years ago. Back then, I naively thought it was wise, something to ensure our family never had to experience another winter without heat or another summer without electricity. The account had my name listed first, but I'd made it accessible to them too, because family. I tapped the option to freeze the account temporarily. No withdrawals, no transfers. It would take them weeks of paperwork and signatures to even begin unfreezing it. And by then, I would be long gone. As the confirmation screen blinked back at me, a tight knot in my chest finally began to loosen. I had given them everything. Money, time, loyalty, chances. Tonight, for the first time, I chose myself. A new email notification popped up. Tyler, my cousin. He had sent a quick message, a meme of a cartoon dog sitting in a burning room saying, "This is fine." No words, just that. I snorted a humorless laugh. Tyler, for all his faults, always knew when something was wrong. I debated replying, but decided against it. I didn't want to drag him into this. He was family by blood, but he wasn't part of this decay. Some bridges needed to burn without witnesses. Instead, I opened a blank email draft, typing out a subject line in mechanical strokes. "You asked me to leave. Now so has my support." I stared at the blinking cursor. My fingers hovered over the send button, heart thudding once, twice, and then I closed the tab. They didn't deserve an explanation. They deserved the silence they had gifted me tonight. The clock on my laptop flicked over to 1:57 a.m. The house creaked and settled, and somewhere downstairs, a bottle clinked against the side of the sink. I imagined Vera sitting on the couch, clutching her glass of wine, watching reruns like nothing was about to change. The heater clicked on, a deep, mechanical groan rumbling through the floorboards. Probably the last cozy night they would enjoy for a while. I double-checked every cancellation, every freeze, every disconnection. Scheduled to activate at sunrise. Neat, clean, irreversible. By tomorrow, when Cullen flipped on the light switch or tried to microwave his coffee, there would be no electricity. When Vera went to pay for her morning groceries using the joint card, it would be declined. When the internet cut out mid-episode of whatever drama she was binge-watching, they would know. They would feel it. I didn't smile, I didn't cry. I simply felt empty. But it was the kind of emptiness that promised something better would fill it in time. At 2 a.m., I closed the laptop with a soft click and leaned back in my chair. Staring at the shadows dancing across my ceiling, my bag was ready. My car, parked 2 blocks away to avoid suspicion, was already packed with essentials. Tomorrow I would leave this town behind this crumbling shell of obligation and resentment. Tomorrow they'd wake up to a life without the daughter they never thought twice about. Morning light barely seeped through the cheap blinds of Nora's apartment when my phone buzzed angrily against the nightstand.
Groggy.
I pulled the covers tighter around me, hoping, irrationally, that it was a wrong number. But a glance at the screen shattered that hope. 12 missed calls. Vera, Cullen, a few unfamiliar numbers, probably neighbors or extended family. I didn't listen to the voicemails right away. I just stared at the list, feeling a complicated knot of emotions tighten in my chest. A twinge of guilt tried to surface. I shoved it down. They made their choice. Rolling onto my back, I tapped through Tyler's text first. It was blunt, straight to the point like he always was. Internet's down, no lights. Dad's furious, Mom crying. I let the phone fall onto the mattress beside me and stared at the cracked ceiling above. It had begun, and I wasn't there to fix it.
Not this time.
A notification chimed, this time a voicemail. Curiosity got the better of me, and I played it on speaker while I pulled on a sweater. Vera's voice, soft and shaking. Karen, honey, there must be some mistake. You wouldn't just leave us like this.
Please call me.
We can fix whatever's wrong. We're family. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words hang in the stale air. Funny how quickly freeloader turned back into family when the Wi-Fi stopped working. Another ding, a text from Colin. You'll regret turning your back on your family. No warmth there. No confusion, just rage. I silenced the phone, turned it face down on the nightstand. Nora shuffled into the living room with 2 mugs of coffee, wearing an oversized hoodie and sleep-tousled hair. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me one of the mugs and sat on the floor next to the bed. After a long sip, she said, You look like someone just told you your winning lottery ticket expired. I huffed a humorless laugh. They're panicking, I said simply. Nora leaned her head against the wall, knees pulled to her chest. Good, she said, voice calm. Sometimes it's not betrayal to save yourself. It's survival. We sat there for a while, listening to the faint sounds of a garbage truck rumbling down the street. Later that afternoon, I headed with Nora to a community event at the local church, a simple autumn festival with pies and pumpkins and booths selling homemade candles. Small town life in all its predictable charm. I stayed near the edges, minding my own business, but it didn't take long for whispers to reach my ears. Cullen was there. He stood near the apple-bobbing booth, voice raised just enough to gather attention. I didn't have to get close to hear him. My daughter abandoned us, he barked. After everything we sacrificed for her. Kids these days. No loyalty, no gratitude. Heads turned. Some nodded sympathetically, but others exchanged skeptical glances. It wasn't the first time Cullen had aired dirty laundry in public, and people remembered things. Nora nudged me gently. Don't, she murmured. I hadn't realized I had started walking toward him. I stopped, forced myself to breathe, let him rant, let him play the victim. I didn't owe them an audience. Instead, I wandered past the booths, letting snippets of conversations drift by. Didn't her daughter pay for their bills for years? Isn't that the one who stayed home to help when the mom got sick? Funny how now she's suddenly the villain. The tide was turning slowly, like an invisible current pulling away from my parents' control. Cullen and Vera could spin their stories, but real cracks were starting to show, and the town had a long memory. Later that evening, back at Nora's place, I scrolled through updates friends had texted me. Photos of the house, the porch light out, uncollected. Newspapers piling up a note that Cullen had gotten into a shouting match with the electric company rep in front of the neighbors. They weren't ashamed of how they treated me. They were only ashamed they couldn't hide it anymore. As the sun set over the familiar rooftops, casting long purple shadows across the empty streets, I stood by Nora's window and watched the town settle into the night. Somewhere, not far from here, the house that once drained every ounce of my patience and love flickered into darkness. This time, I didn't rush back to save it. The house slipped into darkness, and so did a part of me. Yet as the night stretched into morning, the world outside kept moving. People went to work. Dogs barked at the mailman. Kids laughed at the school bus stop. Life didn't pause just because mine had been cracked open. 3 days passed in a blur of trying to build a new normal. I buried myself in tasks, organizing the documents scattered on Nora's kitchen table, scrubbing down the bathroom we shared, tweaking my resume for the 100th time, anything to stay busy, anything to keep from thinking about them. But the mind is a stubborn thing. It was mid-morning when my phone buzzed again, that familiar vibration that sent my heart skittering against my ribs. I almost didn't check it. Almost. The text was from Vera. "After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us. Dad's health is failing. He hasn't eaten in 2 days." I stood in the center of the small living room, the phone heavy in my hand, my stomach twisting into hard knots. The guilt came fast and sharp, carving into me like it had been waiting just below the surface. I sank onto the worn couch, reading the words again and again until they blurred. Images flashed uninvited, birthday parties with homemade cakes, late-night talks in the living room, laughter over burnt Thanksgiving turkeys. Childhood memories that didn't match the reality of recent years, but felt painfully real in this moment. What if they really were suffering? What if I was punishing them too harshly? The guilt slithered deeper as the day dragged on. It didn't stop with Vera's message. The calls started trickling in. Distant relatives I barely spoke to suddenly felt entitled to an opinion. "You know your father's heart isn't strong," Aunt Marcy's voice cooed from one voicemail. "Families fight, sure, but cutting them off like this? It's cruel. Think about your mother," Uncle Phil's text insisted. "She's fragile. This could kill her." Each message hammered another crack into my resolve. Maybe I was heartless. Maybe I was the villain in this story. Maybe my phone buzzed again. A text from Tyler. Short, brutal. "Dad told Mom to fake chest pains next if guilt tripping you doesn't work." I stared at the screen, the weight of that simple sentence knocking the air out of my lungs. So that was the plan. Not mending, not understanding, not accountability. Just another con. They didn't miss me. They missed what I could do for them. Numb. I tossed the phone onto the coffee table and curled into myself on the couch. The sun shifted across the floor, tracing slow golden fingers across Nora's secondhand rug as the hours slipped by. I let the weight of everything press down, not resisting at this time. The years of bending over backward, the quiet sacrifices, the endless giving, hoping it would be enough to earn a seat at a table that was never truly mine. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something colder, sharper. I didn't move until Nora came home from her shift at the clinic, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the hardwood. "You okay?" she asked, dropping her bag by the door. I nodded once slowly, because I finally was. After she disappeared into the kitchen, I reached for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts one by one. Cullen, Vera, Aunt Marcy, Uncle Phil, every cousin and distant relation who had called to scold, but never once called to ask how I was holding up. One by one, I hit delete. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I simply erased. When I was done, I opened my settings and blocked every number tied to that house, that life, that false sense of belonging. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of mercy for myself. I placed the phone face down on the table and sat back, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in years. Tomorrow would come, and with it new battles. I wasn't naive enough to think cutting them off would end the war, but tonight, I had one, a small one. When I put the phone down after blocking every number tied to them, I expected chaos to fall away from my life, like a heavy coat shrugged from my shoulders. Instead, there was only an eerie quiet, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The first few days slipped by uneventfully. I filled my time helping Nora reorganize her apartment, applying for positions in nearby towns, even cooking dinner for us. Small acts of reclaiming normalcy. I thought maybe, just maybe, I had outrun the wreckage they'd tried to leave in my heart. Then it started. It was a Thursday morning, just as the fall chill began creeping through the windows. I was sipping weak coffee from one of Nora's chipped mugs when my phone buzzed across the table. At first, I thought it was another job rejection. Instead, it was a message from Carrie, an old coworker. "Hey, you seen what your dad posted?" Curious, I tapped the link. There it was, splattered across the local town's Facebook group like a festering wound. Cullen's words burned into my screen. Some daughters are raised to be grateful. Some turn into snakes. After everything we sacrificed, our daughter left us sick, starving, abandoned. Pray for us. The post already had over 100 comments. Some offered prayers. Others, people I barely knew, hurled judgment like stones. Ungrateful brat. One read, "Parents give you life, and you spit on them." Another sneered. For a second, my hands shook so hard, I almost dropped the phone. Nora glanced over from the kitchen counter, her brows pulling together. Bad. I could only nod, pressing the phone screen to my chest like it might stop the ache rising in me. By noon, the wildfire had spread. Screenshots flooded my inbox from friends who still cared enough to send warnings. Neighbors, distant cousins, even former teachers commenting on how they'd always suspected something was wrong with that girl. Nora sat down across from me, fierce calm in her voice. "They're writing your story for you. Are you really going to let them?" I stared at her, the words sinking in deeper than I cared to admit.
No, not this time.
I powered off my phone and turned to the drawer where I'd been keeping the folder. My insurance. My truth inside was a carefully kept record. Years of receipts, screenshots, emails, bank statements, proof of the thousands of dollars I'd funneled into that house, into those people without ever once demanding gratitude. Electric bills in my name, mortgage payments from my account, repairs funded by my overtime shifts. They had forgotten the cost because they had never paid it, but I hadn't. I spent the next few hours scanning documents, organizing files. Every receipt was a memory, and every memory was a blade cutting away whatever pity I might have felt. By evening, I had built an arsenal, a neat, unassailable fortress of evidence. Nora peeked into the room, her voice low. "You going to post it?" I looked up from the laptop, shaking my head. "Not yet," I said. "Let them talk a little more. Let them show everyone who they really are." Because I knew something Cullen and Vera hadn't counted on. I wasn't rushing into battle with blind anger. I wasn't swinging wildly, like a wounded animal. I was patient now, strategic. The small town we lived in thrived on gossip, but it also crumbled fast when truth surfaced. All I had to do was wait for the right crack in their facade, the moment when their lies grew too bloated to hold themselves up. And when that moment came, I wouldn't have to say much, just the truth. That night, as Nora and I ate leftover spaghetti on the couch, she raised her fork toward me like a toast.
To survival, she said.
I smiled faintly, lifting my own fork. To never apologizing for saving yourself. Later, lying awake in the quiet of the spare bedroom, I replayed Cullen's words in my head. Some daughters are raised to be grateful. He was right in a way. I had been grateful. Grateful even when they starved me emotionally, drained me financially, erased me as a person, but not anymore. By the time I drifted off to sleep, I wasn't just surviving their lies anymore. I was about to bury them with the truth they thought I'd never dare say. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. I sat at the small dining table in Nora's apartment, laptop open, heart hammering in my chest, but hands steady. The air smelled of leftover coffee and rain from the night before. Ordinary scents clashing against the extraordinary moment about to unfold. Carefully, I uploaded the thread. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was clinical. First, screenshots of my years of utility payments, power, water, internet, each bearing my name, each dated clearly. Then came the bank statements showing mortgage payments pulled monthly from my account. Even when Cullen's paycheck had been enough to cover them, I included old emails between me and the landlord, messages verifying I had funded repairs that had kept the house standing through harsh Ohio winters. Finally, I laid out a brief timeline. The years I sacrificed vacations, birthday celebrations, even simple self-care to keep a roof over their heads. And then the ending, a simple statement. When they asked me to leave, they didn't just lose a daughter. They lost the person who kept the lights on when they weren't looking. I hit post. For a moment, there was silence. Only the faint hum of the fridge broke the stillness. Then the phone began to buzz. It started slow. A few likes, some comments of shock, a few private messages from old school friends saying, "I always wondered why you stayed so long." Then the momentum shifted like a dam breaking. Dozens of shares, hundreds of comments, neighbors, former teachers, even people I barely remembered started chiming in. One neighbor posted, "I remember seeing her shoveling their driveway alone when she was 16 while her parents yelled from the porch." Another Cullen always bragged about how he never paid a cent for household bills. Once Karen got her job. Stories poured out like hidden wounds finally surfacing. It turned out people had seen more than they ever let on. They just hadn't spoken until someone dared to name the truth out loud. Meanwhile, Cullen and Vera panicked. First, Cullen tried to counterattack. He posted a brittle, furious status. "We all have misunderstandings in families. My daughter exaggerates things for sympathy." Sad, really. It backfired instantly. Underneath, commenters weren't buying it anymore. "Funny how you never posted about her paying your bills until now," someone snarked. "You don't look too sick cashing her checks," another added, brutal in its honesty. Then Vera tried a different tactic.
Pity.
Voicemail after voicemail filled my inbox. "Karen, please, your father isn't well. I didn't know he was going to post that. This is all a huge misunderstanding. Please take it down before people think badly of us." There was a time when that pleading tone would have shattered me. Not anymore. I knew now it wasn't about regret. It was about reputation. That afternoon, Nora and I walked down to the fall festival at the town square. The crisp air smelled of caramel apples and hay. Children squealed from the bounce houses. The old brass band tuned up on the stage by the courthouse steps. I felt eyes on me the second I arrived. It wasn't hostility anymore. It was something softer, sadder, a kind of collective realization. I passed by Mrs. Langford, my old elementary teacher. She gave me a nod and a small, sad smile. Mr. Collins from the hardware store tipped his cap silently. Finally, as Nora and I neared the pumpkin carving station, a woman I barely knew, one of Vera's old church friends, stepped forward. Her hand was gentle as she touched my shoulder. "You deserved better, sweetheart," she said quietly. We all knew. We were just too afraid to say it. Tears stung the back of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I nodded, murmuring a soft thank you that seemed too small for the weight it carried. Standing there, in the heart of the community where I had once been invisible, I realized something with a clarity so sharp it almost hurt. The shame was never mine. It had been theirs all along. As the afternoon faded into evening, the square lit up with strings of fairy lights, and the smell of roasted corn filled the air. Children laughed, music played, and for once, I didn't feel like an outsider lurking at the edges. I belonged to myself now. Later that night, as fireworks exploded over the courthouse lawn in bursts of red and gold, I stood still, head tilted back, watching the sky tear itself open in color. A soft voice whispered inside me. Sometimes the brightest displays come only after the darkest storms. And this time, I wasn't running from the wreckage. I was rising from it. The smell of burnt leaves drifted through the air as I leaned against the frame of Nora's apartment window, watching the small town settle into another cool autumn evening. Life outside looked untouched, unaware that mine was teetering on the edge of yet another battlefront. 2 days had passed since I posted the truth. I had almost let myself believe it was over, that maybe, just maybe, silence would be the final word between us. Then came the knock. It wasn't frantic or violent, just a polite, almost embarrassed rap against the door. I glanced at Nora, who peered over her coffee mug, brow furrowed. Crossing the small living room, I opened the door to find a uniformed officer standing there, holding a large manila envelope. "Miss Karen Marin?" he asked, voice neutral. "Yes," I answered, a knot already forming in my stomach. He handed over the envelope. "You've been served. Civil suit. Any questions?" The contacts listed inside. I thanked him mechanically, closed the door with a soft click, and stared down at the envelope like it might bite. I didn't have to open it to know who it was from. Sitting down at the kitchen table, I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the papers inside. Cullen had filed a lawsuit against me. The charges were laughable if they hadn't been so cruel. theft, emotional elder abuse, financial abandonment. It was a tantrum dressed up in legalese. Nora read over my shoulder, muttering, "Unbelievable. They're trying to destroy you because you walked away." For a brief moment, that old, familiar guilt flared hot and sharp like a reopened wound. The same voice that had haunted me since childhood whispered, "Maybe you're making too much of this. Maybe you should have just stayed quiet." But that voice had lost its power. Instead of spiraling, I inhaled slowly, feeling the solid ground of truth beneath my feet. "Not this time," I said aloud, standing up. "I'm done apologizing for saving myself." By noon, I was on the phone with a legal aid office in Columbus. I explained everything methodically, calmly forwarded them the proof I had already compiled. Every payment, every receipt, every documented act of support. They listened, asked careful questions, then assured me they would help draft a countersuit if needed. "You have a strong case," the paralegal said. "And honestly, it sounds like you should be the one suing for exploitation." I didn't want revenge. I wanted my life back. That afternoon, I took their advice and filed my own formal complaints, this time outlining years of financial manipulation under emotional coercion. Elder abuse, it turned out, went both ways when adult children were weaponized for labor and money under the threat of guilt. The backlash was swift. Vera called first, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "Karen, please. You're tearing this family apart. We only wanted what was best for you. You're overreacting. You know your father's not well." I didn't respond. An hour later, Cullen's text came in a final poison dart. "You think you won? Family always gets the last word." I stared at it for a long time, the words blurring slightly as anger and pity warred inside me. Then I opened the small drawer beside my bed. Tucked in the corner, wrapped carefully in a tissue, was the tiny plastic cake topper I'd bought myself on my last birthday, the birthday they had turned into an eviction party, a single candle, a broken memory. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the absurdity of how much hope had once been packed into such a small, meaningless object. "Family isn't who you're born to," I whispered into the quiet room. "It's who treats you like you matter." 2 days later, I found myself standing outside the police station, legal papers in my hand, flanked by a volunteer advocate from the aid office. The building was gray and square, no more imposing than a post office. Yet the weight of what it represented settled heavy on my shoulders. Inside, Cullen sat rigidly at a battered wooden table, Vera beside him, her hands twisting the strap of her handbag. They looked smaller than I remembered, angrier, weaker. An officer calmly explained that if they pursued the false charges, they could be countersued for defamation and financial abuse, charges that could stick with the evidence I held. Cullen's face turned an alarming shade of red. He shoved his chair back, rattling it against the floor. "This is a witch hunt," he snapped at the officer. "She's manipulating everyone." No one responded. Vera crumbled into her seat, sobbing so loudly it echoed off the cinder block walls. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. As they stormed out, the officer turned to me and said quietly, "You did the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Outside, the sun was shockingly bright against the cool autumn sky. I stood there for a moment, letting the light soak into my skin, the courthouse looming behind me, the town stretching ahead. The air smelled crisp, alive, like endings and beginnings all tangled together. With every step away from that building, the weight I had carried for decades lifted a little more. No more explaining, no more guilt, no more apologies as I crossed the parking lot. A gust of wind picked up fallen leaves and sent them swirling around my boots. It was as if the world itself was brushing away the last remnants of a life that no longer belonged to me. The courthouse grew smaller in my rearview mirror as I pulled onto the main road, windows down, letting the crisp fall air wash through the car like a baptism. For the first time in longer than I cared to admit, my heart didn't feel like it was dragging a boulder behind it. No phone vibrating with guilt-laced voicemails. No text demanding apologies I didn't know. No more pulling myself apart trying to stitch a family together that had never really included me. I was free. But freedom, I realized, was quieter than I expected. I spent the next few days at Nora's apartment, moving through the small routines of life, making coffee, folding laundry, walking to the corner store for milk. Ordinary things done without looking over my shoulder. Without waiting for someone to bark an order, toss a bill my way, or remind me that I owed them for existing. It felt foreign and precious. One morning, sitting at the tiny kitchen table with my laptop open, I stumbled across an ad for a small rental unit downtown. Nothing fancy, an aging brick building with creaky floors and drafty windows. But it was mine if I wanted it. And for once, I did. By noon, I'd signed the lease. I didn't tell anyone except Nora. She smiled, handing me a chipped coffee mug to toast with. To new beginnings, she said simply. To finally choosing myself, I added. The next weeks blurred into a soft, golden rhythm. I bought secondhand furniture piece by piece, a couch with sun-faded cushions, a wobbly kitchen table someone had loved before me. I painted the walls pale blue, the color of open skies and deep breaths. At night, I would sit by the single living room window, watching the town lights blink on and off like distant stars, and somewhere between one breath and the next, I realized the silence no longer felt empty. It felt earned. One Saturday, while unpacking a final box, I found it tucked away at the bottom, a relic from another life, the tiny plastic cake topper, the one from the birthday that had ended everything. I held it in my palm for a long while, the late afternoon sun glinting off its cheap, bent edge. It didn't hurt to look at it anymore. It didn't feel like a reminder of what I lost. It felt like proof of what I survived. I placed it on a shelf above my desk, a small private trophy, not to honor the people who hurt me, but to honor the girl who didn't let it destroy her. Sometime later, a card slipped under my door. No return address. Inside, a short note in careful handwriting. You were never the problem. Some people just fear the ones they can't control. I never found out who sent it. I didn't need to, because I already knew the truth. The final truth. Family isn't something you earn by sacrifice. It's something you're given freely, or not at all. And in their absence, I was building something they could never take from me. Peace, self-respect, a life stitched together, not from obligation, but from choice as I sat by my window that night. City lights glowing softly below. I smiled to myself and whispered the words I had waited my whole life to believe. I am enough. Sometimes walking away from the people who raised you is the only way to become the person you were meant to be. Blood may tie us together, but respect, trust, and kindness are what make a true family. Have you ever faced a moment where choosing yourself meant losing everything you thought you needed? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If you found a piece of yourself in this story, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful journeys like this. Because here, every story matters. Stay strong. Stay true. Family drama doesn't define you. How you rise from it does.